franchise secrets, Erik Von Horn.
Hey, in this episode of Franchise Secrets, I have Wyatt Batchelor on, and he's in a group of partners. There's 4 of them. They own 150 fast food restaurants: Burger King, KFC, Jimmy John's. West Point grad, spent time in the military in special operations. So we had a lot to talk about. He talked about winning today. Like, how do you win today, and why that's important? Special operations to what you're dealing with as an entrepreneur. So there's some cool things that go into that. Then he went into investment banking, so special ops to investment banking with Goldman Sachs, and then and that's after that got into franchising, and has quickly scaled to 150 locations. All but I think 3 of them were existing locations that they acquired. So he loves fragmented systems as part of their model. We talked about the similarities between those brands. We talked about leasing versus buying real estate, and how in the heck do you get money to scale to 150 locations? I'm talking to a lot of these guys that have scaled to a large business. And with 150 locations, where do you get the money for that? And it just didn't come from one wealthy person or one bank. And it started out like how most everyone else would start out. As it was interesting to see how that evolved. So we talked about that leverage, how to use it, when not to use it, how to use it prudently. So it was a real fun conversation with someone who's built to 150 locations in a very short period of time. So I hope you enjoyed this episode with Wyatt. Wyatt, welcome to the show.
Erik, great to meet you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I just heard about you and I'm like, I need to get this guy on the podcast. And I'm not as familiar with food brands as I am about a lot of other things. I'm trying to interview some different players in franchising that are in food, because there's so many things that I want to learn from people like you. And then you have a background in, U.S. Army, special operations, in Afghanistan, financial analyst at Goldman. And so why don't we just start with a bit of your background to give the audience context for this conversation, and we'll eventually go into, how you today own 150 restaurants across multiple brands. So what's the background?
Yeah, of course. Well, again, Erik, certainly appreciate you having me on. My background, probably non-standard to what you normally hear from. So I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Not a huge town, but not a terribly small town. Growing up, the definition of professional success was either becoming a doctor or a lawyer. And that was kind of my paradigm at that time. Grew up playing football and was recruited to play at the collegiate level. And so, was really excited, young 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid getting recruited. But some of the SEC schools, I learned very quickly I was not going to be at the best of the best, which is the University of Alabama. But I did receive an offer from Vanderbilt and wound up committing to play football at Vanderbilt. And then one day I got a phone call and letter in the mail from a gentleman named Bobby Ross, who, if you know college sports, he was the head football coach for Georgia Tech in the early 90s, won a national championship with them, and then went to a Super Bowl later on in his career. And towards the end of his football career, he wanted to do something to try to give back. I don't know what that necessarily says about me as an athlete, but he wound up at the United States Military Academy as their football coach. And he asked me to come up on an official visit. So went up there for a football game in the fall of 2003. And as my father and I were leaving, he mentioned, look, son, if, one thing you need to be cognizant of is that this might be a decision that you regret one day if you don't do it. And so you can imagine as an impressionable young teenager being told that by his father, the next decision that I made was fairly obvious. And so I enrolled at the United States Military Academy in 2005, played football there all 4 years, learned a tremendous amount, but business wasn't necessarily on the horizon at this point. After the military academy, you have to serve an obligatory 5 years active duty. And during this time period, I didn't necessarily, think that I was going to be a career military officer. Quite frankly, I'm the first person in the family to have served in the armed forces, but I knew if it was going to be a 5-year obligation, I wanted to get the most out of it. I wanted to be with the most elite units. I wanted to go through the best schools, best training, and try to cultivate this idea of leadership. And so during those 5 years, I did exactly that. When subjected myself to some of the most intense schools, going through Ranger School, did a deployment with the 101st Airborne Division, who I willingly chose as my post out of the military academy, which I knew that they were always going to be the tip of the spear. And then subsequently realized when I was overseas, this world of special operations was interesting. And having dealt with them a little bit on my first deployment, I realized that this was an organization, particularly in the United States Ranger Regiment. These were a group of individuals that every single person that I came across was squared away, very smart, peak physical condition, always challenging themselves. And I realized that this was an organization that I just had to be a part of. And so decided to throw in a packet for that organization, and was lucky enough to get selected. I had to go through the selection process, which is a few weeks long, and it culminates in a board. So you have your physical piece, you have your military and training piece, and then you have a board, which is a collection of different individuals that just grill you on different types of questions. And you can make it through all this and completely bomb the board, and then you don't get to make it into the unit. Fortunately enough for me, I was able to pass all that and then made it into the Ranger Regiment, and then did that for the rest of my military career. Multiple deployments, got to serve with, all those 3-letter organizations that I'm sure you're familiar with, as well as the top tier units in the United States Special Operations community. So it was great exposure to the world's elite. And I realized that there are certain characteristics and principles that these people live by. And if I could internalize those and then incorporate them later in my life, I had a strong feeling that I could be successful. And so following the military, my wife and I had made the decision after my 3rd deployment that, 3 deployments in 5 years was a lot. Certainly by that point, given a lot out of myself, and we made the decision, albeit loved the military, particularly the organizations that I was with, but it was time to make a new decision. So collectively, we made the choice to leave the military, and then had the tremendous opportunity to go work at Goldman Sachs for a little bit, and then subsequently go to business school at Columbia University in Manhattan. And getting my MBA, I thought was an exceptional opportunity. Met some of the world's smartest individuals. I was definitely at the bottom end of that totem pole, but I was exposed to just incredibly bright people, and it really helped to refine what I wanted to do and get into in the professional world. And that was simply, I wanted to be a business owner. I wanted to be my own boss, create an organization that I could be proud of, that I could give, potentially pass on to my family, and then help others within this, this vision of the business that I was creating. But I realized that I had a fundamental lack of business experience. And, after communicating with various different students in business school, as well as professors and whatnot, I just tried to expose myself to everything. So I was in finance for a little bit, where I got exposed to a bunch of different companies. And one of the organizations that we worked with in the sponsors group was 3G, which is a private equity firm. I have a historic background, but started in Brazil, bought this small company that I'm sure everyone's familiar with, AB InBev, which is Budweiser. And then they bought Burger King back in the early 2010s. And having a conversation with those guys, they said, look, Wyatt, finance is great. It's an exceptional opportunity, but why don't you give this Burger King thing a shot? Fast food was never a path that I thought I would get myself into, but their pitch was compelling. They effectively said, look, you get into Burger King and you're going to learn everything about business because fast food touches everything. There's the real estate side. You have to go out and you have to find the best sites. You have to negotiate leases, understand the acquisition mechanics on purchasing properties. Then you have the operations piece. How do you deal with people? How do you actually get people to effectuate your plans? There's the tax side. Every aspect of small business is incorporated into the fast food world. And I felt like, hey, this is a great way to get a crash course on business, learn on someone else's dime. And then I felt like it was worth giving a shot. So interviewed at Burger King, was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to work there, wore several different hats, ultimately ran a division for Burger King out on the West Coast. And one thing that I noticed was, look, franchisees, just normal everyday people, but all of them had their own private jets. And so I was like, hey, this seems like an interesting world to be a part of. I've got a lot of smart friends. Why don't I try to figure this out? And so that brings me to my partnership. Work with 3 other fantastic people. I really attribute the success of our business thus far to the collective capabilities of the partnership. And so we started MBN Brands back in late 2018. My partners, Kevin and Michael Mulcahy and Leo Nolan, all of us have what I call complementary skill sets, where, everybody's got an opinion, but opinions that are lightly held, I should say. So, certainly an academic approach to things and have conversations, debates about different problems, but ultimately come to a consensus around every type of solution. And I sincerely attribute the success to the partnership. And so we came together, made our first acquisition of Burger King's in early 2019, and then realized that this was an opportunity that we couldn't pass up, and started exploring other concepts to become a part of, where consolidation was an opportunity, organic growth was an opportunity, and we're still building on this. But the next brand that we got into was Jimmy John's, and then subsequently KFC. And roughly 3-4 years later, we went from about a dozen Burger Kings to about 150 KFC, Jimmy John's, and Burger Kings.
Well, that was great. And I'd like to start to unpack pieces of that. Just real quick before I start to unpack, 150 in a short period of time, how many of those were ground up versus acquisitions?
Yeah, of course. So we've only built a few organic units. We have built 2. We've got a third in the pipeline. Not intentionally. Certainly a lot of acquisitions out there, and we were dedicated to building. We still are dedicated to building, but if you couldn't tell by the timeline, made our first acquisition in 2019, and then, a few short months later, COVID hit, and that made organic development a bit more difficult. So we built a few, but primarily through acquisition.
All right, perfect. Let's go back. I'm kind of going to follow your timeline and dive into some of it. So I've got friends, people I know that are in the military, various different special forces in the military. I've had Jason Redman, he was a Navy SEAL on, and he's written a few books and very much into leadership. Jocko, I know. Let's wait on my question about like leadership and military. Give the audience like what is the purpose of Rangers, because every special forces kind of has a specific purpose and what they do and whatnot. And I love the military. I was just on a plane coming back from meeting with my business partners, and the pilot got on and said, "Hey, we are honored to carry on board a body of someone who just died in a helicopter accident in the military, and the family was there." And I was in first class. They were back a little bit. I got off the plane and waited to acknowledge them. And so carries a very special place in my heart, even though I've never been in the military. But give the audience like what is the purpose of a Ranger?
Yeah, of course. Rangers were probably the least known, but I would actually say we're the fiercest, most elite infantry unit, if not the most powerful special operations unit in the world.
What do SEALs say to that? I would say, as long as cameras are with us, that's who we are.
Hey, I think a SEAL that's actually telling the truth would agree.
I love it.
Hey, today the Ranger is always the one SEALs call when they're in need. So I will say that to anybody. No, look, every special operations unit has its very distinct purpose and mission. And in the Tier 1 special operations world, I'm pretty sure that I can say this publicly, but everyone is built around a single purpose. And so you look at Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, and Rangers. Delta Force was created to conduct hostage rescue operations from an airplane. SEAL Team 6 was hostage rescue operations on a boat. And then the Rangers were created for airfield seizures. And so you can imagine if you're invading a country and need a strategic foothold, and the most strategic place you can get is an airfield. And so if you've seen Black Hawk Down, that is a movie about Rangers and Delta Force. Rangers are a bit larger. If you think characteristically the difference between Delta or SEAL Team 6 and Rangers, we have more people. And so a typical strike force might be 2 to 3 times the size of a unit within Delta or SEAL Team 6. And so with that, we bring more firepower to the fight. And so I say that jokingly when people need to get rescued, they call the Rangers, but that's reality. And so we were created for the purpose in Afghanistan for direct action raids. And so anytime we discovered where a bad guy was, particularly a high-level bad guy, the Rangers were the ones going on the helicopters to go to their houses. And so for multiple deployments, several years overseas, I was doing direct action raids against some of the worst people in the world, and was just doing that night after night, banging on their doors and rolling up the bad guys.
And where do Green Berets fall into the mix? Because I know they have friends that are Green Berets, and they kind of have a different place on what they do, different kind of duty that they have.
Yeah. So Green Berets, also an incredible force within the United States military. They have a very dynamic mission and skill set. So a lot of what they do is working with local nationals. The acronym is FID. And so they're out there working with the local military, the local police force, etc., training them on tactics, techniques, and procedures to be able to employ the local indigenous forces against the bad guys. And so you wanted to talk about a harrowing reality, but it's just a handful of Green Berets, so 5 to 10 people that are going out with 150 Afghan nationals. And so they have to understand the language, the culture, very dynamic environment, and influence these individuals to fight in a way that is effective. And so it's, they do direct action type missions, but for the most part, it is working with indigenous forces to effectively effectuate what the United States government is trying to do, but get the local nationals to actually complete the plan.
So with all of that, that's why it screams leadership. All these different special operation folks, and that's why we have people like Jocko and others that are more public facing that are talking about leadership and things like that. So when you look back on that, what did you learn there about leadership that that would have the average United States citizen understand why Jocko and folks like him know a bit about leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, the leadership topic is something that I could talk about all day. Particularly with my experiences in the military, I think there's a lot of translatable skills. It's how do you deal with people, everything from risk mitigation to, getting people to effectuate a plan that they might not necessarily want to agree with and to want to do. And then 3, how do you make it through just extraordinarily difficult times, right? And come out successful on the other end. And I remember going through, specifically Ranger School, and the people, notably the people that don't become Rangers are the ones that can't make it through RAP week, which is the first week. Those are the guys that are waiting for it to end, while the successful ones are just waiting for breakfast. And, over time, I've realized that that's the key to getting through any challenging time. Don't worry about tomorrow, win today. Right. And I remember going through COVID, Friday the 13th and realizing like, hey, this is a bad situation, but let's just take it piece by piece. And to throw in a combat story, I remember one of my first deployments, I'm doing an operation, walking through a field, and it's just completely open terrain. And then all of a sudden the enemy starts just lighting us up, right? Literally it was like something out of a movie where multiple bullets just riddled the path in front of me. You see sand get kicked up, and then everybody just hits the deck. And I remember going through Ranger School is take everything, assess the situation, and just take it step by step. And if you can solve a problem incrementally, right, one problem after the other, you're going to make it through it. So the first step was, how do we get out of this particular situation? How do we get off this particular field and behind cover? And so the first step was just get behind cover and then come up with a plan on how we were going to overcome the enemy. And I remember going through COVID, it's, okay, guys, everything is shut down. What do we do? Let's just take this piece by piece, chunk by chunk, and not worry about 2 years from now when there's going to be a vaccine or stuff that's out of our control. Let's figure out what's in our control. What are the problems that we can focus on now? Let's accomplish those. And again, don't worry about tomorrow. Let's win today. So a lot of different anecdotes. Don't want to boil it down to, those simple things, but again, could go on and on about leadership.
Attention, franchisors and franchisees. There are 2 really important resources that I want to share with you that will help you avoid costly mistakes and increase your enterprise value. The first is our free Facebook group. It's a community that has over 4,000 franchisees and franchisors in it. When somebody asks a question, they get honest and authentic answers from multiple perspectives. You can join the group for free over at franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. The second resource I want to share with you is if you're a franchisor and you're frustrated that you're not awarding as many franchises as you thought you would, this is the reason I created the Franchisor Mastermind. If you want access to the information, the techniques that the best franchise sales organizations are using to award franchises, and you want what mature brands have with their playbook of having happy, successful franchisees that grow the right way, then you might want to check out the Franchisor Mastermind. The reason why people join is they want access to my Rolodex, my connections. They want the playbook to achieve both short-term and long-term success. They want to increase enterprise value in their brand. Links will be in the show notes or at scalablefranchise.com. Yeah, we could have multiple podcasts just on that topic itself. Okay, let's fast forward out of the military, working for Goldman. Like, why did you want to work for them? Why did they want you working for them?
Yeah. So again, my experience with the corporate world, having come from Birmingham, Alabama, not really understanding, what investment banking was, quite frankly, when I heard the word banker, I thought it was the local teller, the local Bank of America, that was my idea of a banker. But then after doing some research, I realized that Goldman Sachs, that was the bank that was at the vanguard of these investment banks, the top of the top, the best of the best. And if you can make it in there, you were set, you were on top. And so I set out to try to get a job there. And so I started networking and tried to talk to as many people as I could. Fortunately, they had a pseudo military program at the time to allow people in from the military to give them exposure to banking. And so again, I took advantage of this opportunity. And it's a lot like, my philosophy with Ranger Regiment. I wanted to be around the best because I felt like there's learning through osmosis, and by being around people that have high standards for themselves, you create those high standards for yourself, and success becomes not necessarily inevitable, but more likely. And then in terms of why did Goldman want me, I'm still wondering that to this day. But I think having gone through what I went through in the military, various different schools, they saw some sort of propensity for me or proclivity for me to succeed, and so they took a shot and brought me into their world, which I'm still very fortunate for.
Do you, in your organization, I know there's different groups out there that kind of have programs to recruit former military, specifically special ops, and I'm sure there's others, but I'm familiar with the special ops. Do you partake in any of that, trying to find key people for your organization that are former military, or is it just you're looking for the best regardless?
Absolutely, and I'll throw this out there for all your listeners, because there's a program called Skill Bridge within the United States military that it's an internship opportunity where the United States government continues to pay for the service person's salary for 6 months, and it de-risks the employer by giving these individuals a chance at the government's expense. And so I think that's incredible for us because we're effectively getting free labor. But then two, it's a tremendous opportunity to take a lot of people that have a tremendous amount of potential. And so I focus on, different special operations organizations. I'm currently talking to somebody from the Special Operations Aviation Regiment. I'm talking to a Navy SEAL. We've had various different Rangers of workforce in the past. I focus on the soft community because that was the community that I was a part of. But then I also see them being a bit more aggressive. They have that insatiable appetite for success. And so it's a world that we try to take advantage of. And then my operating partner, he's a former Marine, our COO. The guys that run our business right now, one of them was in the Marines, is actually still a reservist in the Marines, and then the other one was in the Canadian military. And so I see a lot of characteristics that you want in a leader, and successful business people. I think a lot of them have that military experience, and if you can understand SOPs, just how to procedurally run an organization, which is what you get in the military, there's a reason why former military people, veterans specifically, do well in the business world. And so I think if you can find those that have done well in the military, there is a high likelihood for success in the business world.
Love it. I've linked you can find the link to SkillBridge in the show notes for anyone listening. They want that. And thanks for context to that too. Let's dive into the partnership.
Of course.
There's the dream team. You got 4 of you, and would love to kind of understand how the 4 of you came together and the dynamics of the partnerships, different skill sets and the dynamics of the partnership.
Yeah, so the connecting thread there is Kevin. Kevin and I went to business school together. His brother is Michael, who's the other partner, and then Leo Nolan, he worked with at Goldman earlier on in their careers. It is a complementary group of individuals. Taking them each. Every one of us has our own personalities, our own ways of doing things. But I think it's an extraordinary group of people. First off, Michael has a steel trap for a mind. He remembers everything. I talk about being detail oriented and procedural, methodical. Michael, he really encapsulates all of that. He is a fantastic individual. Nothing gets by him. And quite frankly, I think the business would fall apart if it wasn't for him. And then more importantly, I think his greatest characteristic is he just cares about people. And so I think, having him as a partner, he brings that particular attribute and characteristic to make sure that people are recognized. And recognition is one of the most important things in leadership in general. But he never fails to make sure that, people are recognized and understood. Leo is, he's a character, love him to death. I think one of his greatest abilities is to question things. And if you've ever been in a room with him, you just hope you're not the one getting questioned. You want to take the Socratic approach, and he perpetuates that. His ability to discern information and get down to the brass tacks is remarkable. And so, as you can imagine, he does a lot of the diligence aspect. He does a lot of the legal work. He is very much in the weeds, but he does it in a way that he simplifies things, and it's quite extraordinary to see. And then Kevin, what can I say about Kevin? He's one of the smartest people that I've ever met. Kevin, one of the I was listening to somebody a while ago, and they said, look, the smartest people, at least my perception of the smartest people, are the ones that ask the best questions. And that's generally speaking Kevin in every meeting. He brings up something that you just haven't thought of. But in the back of your mind, you're thinking, geez, why didn't I think of that? It's so logical, right? And so collectively, the group, we work well together. I think if you were a fly on the wall listening to some of our meetings, you might perceive it as contentious. But at the end of the day, we go through problems, we work things out, we debate them fiercely. But I think we come out with the best solution for various different problems. And what I mentioned before, just how do you survive? It's just taking one problem at a time and overcoming those different challenges. And I feel like since 2018, it's been one problem after another. There's going to be problems that we have to deal with today. But at the end of the day, the successful business people, in my mind, are the ones that can take a problem, create a solution, and then go to the next thing. Ultimately, our staff, they never call me just to say what's up or, tell me what's going on in their lives or tell me the good things. They come to me with problems, right? And so we recognize that, and it's our ability to work closely together, not kill each other. And then also everybody is aligned around the same goals. There's not many groups out there with 4 partners, 4 equal partners. And we realized at the beginning, hey, there's a lot of mouths to feed here. And so we're going to have to sprint at this, and we're going to have to sprint hard, and we're going to have to do some pretty cool things. And I don't think we have let up on the gas since day one. We've certainly had our fair share of different failures and learning experiences, but the one goal has always remained the same. Let's become the the biggest organization that makes the most money. And I think this is the partnership that can get that done.
So obviously you've done a lot with 150 locations. Kind of give us the timeline on those, like the brands and the locations and the geography, however you want to do that, to bring us up to speed on the organization that you have today. So I want people to get a sense of the speed, the size, and the scale.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, a lot of different acquisitions. We started with 12 Burger Kings in Southern California. We ultimately wound up selling those to move to Colorado, there where we bought a package of about a dozen initially in Colorado, and then another package of about 18, and then another around 30. And so we're up to about 60 restaurants with Burger Kings in Colorado, primarily on the Front Range, and around Denver. Jimmy John's, very similar. We started with a single Jimmy John's in Denver, and we have grown since then to about 65 restaurants, and that was over the course of 20 different acquisitions. So a highly fragmented organization, or franchise base, and that was effectively the model, though, the thesis. Can we look at highly fragmented systems and then roll these things up into a larger operating entity? And then our KFCs are in Reno and Tulsa, Oklahoma, so pretty evenly distributed there. So again, the states are Colorado, and effectively half our restaurants are in Colorado, and then the other half are effectively the tangential states around it.
What's the real reason you got out of California?
Oh, there's a few. I would say it's a challenging business environment. Look, you can make a lot of money there, but you're going to have to deal with 10x the headaches. And so we were thrilled with the opportunity to get out.
I think that's a good lesson. I'm the same way. I asked that question because, I couldn't wait to get out of California as a business owner. And I think it's important for the audience to realize, like, where you go is important. Like that's where you live. And that, that's one of the reasons you want to be in a certain state. But if you don't have to live there, definitely take different things into consideration. And it's not just political. I'm not talking politically. There's a lot of other things to consider: where growth is happening, where it's declining, trends. You got to look at the macro stuff that's happening in the state from an economic standpoint, business standpoint, what's business friendly, whether you're doing it from apartment investing or you are, owning businesses. It's important to realize, like, not everything is created equal opening up in different states. What's different about these different brands? Like, what's similar and what's different? Because as an outsider, you see them all under the QSR category. But I don't know. So, like, what do you see as the big differences in these brands from an operational standpoint or customer base standpoint? And what's similar?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably more similarities than there are differences. They certainly all have their own nuance. They're part of larger organizations that that operate them. So you have Yum Brands, you have RBI, then you have Inspire Brands. I'll start there. I think each one of those organizations is tremendous. Between Patrick Doyle, Josh Kobza, Tom Curtis at Burger King, Inspire Brands led by Paul Brown, Christian Charneau, just all incredible, extraordinary people. And so the first thing that I would tell you is start with the brand, the franchisor, because I think that's going to be the best indicator of long-term success. There's various independent groups out there, but when you hitch your wagon to a company or a franchisor that has demonstrated success in the past, and then also a path for further growth in the future, and it's led by competent people, I think that is a indicator that your franchise is going to be successful. And so again, I think looking at those individuals and then understanding who works there. I would say that, characteristically, each one of the franchise or franchisors work similarly. Again, there's some nuanced difference between them. Getting down to the actual box level, KFC, I think the complexities in there lie in it's fried chicken. So you're having to fry raw chicken every day, and albeit, that sounds like a simple task. I'm not a cook. I have no idea how to fry chicken in my own kitchen. I know it would be extraordinarily difficult. And so I can't imagine, the hundreds of pounds that we're going through every day in an individual restaurant. The person cooking that, the cook of chicken is a skilled employee. So it's not your typical QSR employee. Those individuals are, smart, hardworking, and they have to be procedural. Jimmy John's is a bit nuanced in the sense that it's got delivery. It's got its own internal proprietary delivery system. And that is something that you have to learn. It's a true skill set. How do you hire drivers? How do you, schedule delivery orders, that sort of thing. And then Burger King is probably more of your traditional QSR, but in the sense that it, relatively higher volumes, a lot of people come in, you have to, staff these things appropriately, and deal with a lot of individuals. In a perfect scenario, we have 30 to 40 people on a bench at any individual Burger King, and you scale that across the number of Burger Kings that we have. That's a lot to manage. And so the QSR world, my partner Kevin puts it the best. People think this is mailbox money. It's not. There's a lot that goes into it. I think, your experience, no small business is mailbox money. If you're thinking about getting into this and that's your idea, you're just wrong. It's a lot of work in all of these. And again, they have their own nuances, but they're all fantastic brands in their own rights.
Do you own any of the real estate, or do you lease all the real estate?
We do. We own some of the real estate. Majority of our properties are leased. And on new builds, the idea up to this point has been to employ more of a sale leaseback type model. So we'll acquire the dirt and then sell it, and then effectively diluting a lot of the upfront costs in developing new builds. But hopefully over time we will start to develop more of a real estate portfolio, which we've already done to some extent.
So 150 QSRs is, you probably just didn't go to the local bank, get an SBA loan to get started with all of this stuff. You can't scale that way. And I get a lot of questions from people, whether it's in the Facebook group or just, reaching out to me, like, how do I really scale something big? And in my mind, like, you've scaled quickly and substantially. How did you guys go about it from finding the money, getting the money, and I'm guessing you're like partnered with people with that believe in it, trust in it, and they've seen success, and there's probably access to more capital to help you guys keep growing. But give the audience a sense of how you went about that.
Yeah, I would say the genesis, it's what you would expect. And so the partners, we collectively pooled our cash together, and that's how MBN Brands became about. And so we pulled our cash. That was the equity piece. And then, the reality is we had to go out and try to find a local lender. We did not do SDA. We're fortunate we didn't need to, but finding a local lender that would take a risk and lend to us. We had to do that. This was an evolution. We had to do that a few times because the big banks, they didn't want to play with us yet because we were, one, unproven, two, not skilled enough, and three, just didn't have the track record. But as we started to scale more, get more and more units under acquisition, then we could start having these larger conversations with various different lenders. And then taking a step back in the beginning, once we realized that scale was interesting, took the friends and the family route. I think we were able to demonstrate a bit of success to that point, and then had conversations with various different people close to our networks that were interested in putting some of their cash into the business. And so that's how we scaled initially. And then once we started realizing like this is something that we can truly scale to a large degree, it evolved into having more conversations with more sophisticated groups, both on the debt and equity side. And so, from the lender side, we have a great partner with Wells Fargo. Everybody that I work with over at Wells has been just a fantastic group. They like all the concepts that we're in, and they've been great partners on the debt side. And on the equity side, one of the places that we've had a lot of success are the family offices. I think family offices in general, like the fast food space, in the QSR world, our investment thesis was it's a business that, we can conceptually understand. Two, it's been around for a long time. The first Burger King came up in the 1960s, and so it's got that established track record. Three is the Amazon effect. Can that affect the fast food space? And at least to this point, people have to eat, and people want convenient food. And so, is there a true competitor to that particular industry? And the answer was nothing that we've seen so far. And oh, by the way, it's got very consistent growth in terms of sales and then also profitability. And so I think with family offices, they looked at this as, look, it's not a growth industry. These businesses aren't making, double digit same store sales every year, but they're growing at a clip that's pretty commensurate to GDP growth. And that's a fairly safe environment. And then, you can put a reasonable amount of leverage on these businesses, which amplify your returns as well. Now, we've been mindful of how much debt we use, but it's also, it's a piece that, we've seen the family offices and so, a lot of the feedback from various different partners that we have in that space is this is an industry that they want to continue to grow with.
That's kind of a great, timeline of it's, you just didn't have a friend with a bunch of money that allowed you to do all this. You guys had to start out with a small bank, go into bigger banks, and then doing stuff both on the debt and equity side. Looking back, was there anything that you would have done differently if you could have? Because I know certain, sometimes people are giving away too much equity, and for later investors, or maybe they structured things wrong in their agreements or the agreements they have with equity partners that make it challenging for new money to come in. So any kind of lessons learned, what things that you did right and things that you did wrong on the structure of all this to be able to continue to raise funds?
Yeah, look, nothing stands out in my mind that I would say, hey, this is demonstrably one thing that we did wrong. I think getting back to the leverage piece, there's people that will buy businesses 100% leverage, 95% leverage, and that might be more necessity than anything else. But if you don't have to do that, I think taking a more prudent approach with leverage is always going to be the best avenue. I think going through what we went through, you have to understand that, as you're negotiating with lenders and going through the different covenants and whatnot, also keep in mind that stuff happens, right? Like pandemics do happen. And so worst case scenarios can play out, and having a plan, don't just go through the covenants and realize like, hey, this leverage level is going to be fine because we'll never hit that level, right? Understand that no, there's a world where that could potentially happen. The world could shut down. The the state of California could tell you that you can't open your restaurants. And then when that happens, you can't make any money. And so in a world where that happens, what are the mechanics? How does this play out? And so never convince yourself that something doesn't have any potential of happening. More than likely, if it's in the docs, there's a reason that it's there. And so just be educated on every line, understand it a lot better, and then do the scenario analysis. But in terms of, look, could we have done anything differently? Yeah, there's certainly things that we could have changed, but again, I think that growth is an evolution, and you want to. I think the best thing that we did was ultimately being fair to ourselves, and then being fair to investors. And I think if everyone leaves a little bit on the table, then everybody wins. And so just being fair to everybody.
Last question for you. You've done well with existing established brands that have weathered a lot through different economic cycles, and they have a big brand name. What is your interest level as a partnership on some of these new, cool, sexy brands that may someday be a Jimmy John's or Burger King? Like, what is interesting about that or not interesting about that to your group?
Yeah. I think the new in vogue brands are interesting. I think there's a lot of potential for a lot of these. I will say that the food space is a saturated market. I think everybody's very familiar with the statistic of most restaurants fail. I forgot what the exact number was, but something like 95% of restaurants after a couple of years no longer in business. So look, I think there is the days of these ubiquitous brands, I think, are probably over. So you take your McDonald's, your Wendy's, your Burger Kings, Taco Bell's, Chick-fil-A's. Those are probably the brands that can, hit those 7,000 plus units in the United States. The brands that are trying to achieve that, it's going to be more difficult. So the one thing that I just have to be cognizant of, and look, we've done a lot of our research, and you take these various different regional brands, as soon as they start going outside of their areas of concentration, they just don't perform well. And so being discerning and disciplined and looking at these brands, understanding where the opportunity is, and if it's really not within their nexus of success, look at it much more discerningly. But look, I think there's tons of opportunity, particularly in the chicken segment. There's a lot of stuff that's interesting happening there in the coffee space. A lot of opportunity there. So we're excited. We try to learn and diligence different brands every single day, and hopefully soon we'll be getting into something new here soon.
Wyatt, it's been fun having you on, informative. Thanks for going deep into some of these different areas, and can't wait to see where you are 5 years from now. If you ever swing by South Dakota on your private jet, let me know.
Try to get there. All right, Eric, so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to connecting again soon.
Take care. Thanks for listening to the Franchise Secrets podcast. Links to everything can be found over at franchisesecrets.com. And if you want my help with anything from starting your own franchise to growing your current franchise business, please visit scalablefranchise.com.